So welcome back, and a couple of things. A couple of things to excuse me to report. So you should start by now. There should be a kind of continuity to the course, and you should hoping that you can see the ways in which elements that we began with early in the semester have kind of become part of the story in an ongoing way. And I'll try to remind you or pitch that to you from time to time, but I'm hoping that it's happening within your own soul, and that you're seeing the ways in which the pieces have some connection to one another. And hopefully that will become even more the case and more evident as time goes on over the rest of the semester. So just to pick up a little bit of that, I'll remind you that early in the course we began with the theories of George Herbert Mead and the idea that self and society are not separate things, but rather that who we are, our individual selves, are constituted and only can be constituted through the social context in which we are in, that we're all in a way performing for each other, and that is the way we are having any sense of self and the capacity to introspect, to make ourselves indeed the object of our own thoughts. And that that means that what is in our minds are each other, and that society consists of those interactions. That's a kind of old idea for us. However, we know that, and that implies something. It implies that the selves that we are socially constructed, and by extension, so is everything else. And the phrase that's used, which I think used before, but it's become now a kind of almost slogan, a bumper sticker in much of social science, and that is the social construction of reality. That there is no reality out there apart from how it is socially constructed. And at the same time that I remind you of that and bring up this phenomenon of the social construction of reality, I have to say that there are limits to that. And some people are not comfortable with that way of thinking. And I'll just signal that fact that some people are not comfortable with that way of thinking. I mean, not only as individuals, but also in academic circles and in sociology itself. There are walls. People like to point that out. That is, if you try to walk through the wall on the right because you think it is socially constructed, you are in for a rude awakening. And so it might be, if we continue that line of thinking, that there are other walls around us, things that sociologists refer to often as social structure. And we'll be talking about those kind of social walls as the term goes on. But I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up, as it were, not to try to walk through walls, because you won't get very far. You'll just be injured, and you'll be humiliated as well. But also that there are things that are like walls, but which are social. And we'll be getting to those. So that's just a little bit of advertisement about programs that are coming. But meanwhile, we want to exploit this idea of the social construction of reality for all it's worth, and really give it its best go here in the court of sociological opinion. And indeed, I'll just say that I find it very attractive, and I never let it go completely, or really in any significant degree. But later on, we're going to try to bring up these social walls and give them their fair due as well, or at least try to do that. We've been talking about media, and if you talk about the social construction of reality, media is an easy card to play, because as I mentioned last time, the naive view of media, and I think virtually all social scientists would regard it as naive, is that the media reflect, as the New York Times says, all the news that's fit to print, that there is a reality out there that is just going on, and along waltzes the reporter, and through a photograph or through a story captures that that reality, and then portrays it, and then either it's a transfusion or we interpret what we see. Those are two different ways of thinking what goes on next. But the idea is that there is that reality out there, and the media capture it for us, whether it's entertainment media, whether it's a novel, and especially if it's a reporter, because the news media are supposed to do that. So I talked a lot about the news media, and I'm going to do a lot more talking about the news media today. And my news media are the newspapers. That is where I get my information from. That's not true of the majority of the American public. They get their news media, their news from television. I think television works in very similar ways. And increasingly, of course, people get it from the web. Why then, how then can we justifiably talk so much about newsprint as being the news media? Well, for all the hocus pocus and all the big deals about all the blogs and even about television news, it remains the case that print news is the source of news, regardless of where it ends up. So the blogosphere, the internet, has enormous amount going on, but it isn't really reportage. There is very little that originates in those places. The stuff that then gets molded, played with, people have fun with, and I'm thinking of Colbert Report and the The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, plus all the craziness of the blogs. Very little is original reporting. It's playing with stuff that someone else has put out, and that someone else are the newspapers. And in the United States, and it's true in most countries, there is a hierarchy to the news media. And we are fortunate that we live at the top of that hierarchy here in New York. The New York Times is unquestionably the most important newspaper in the US, and some would say it's the most important newspaper in the world. And its importance is not just that it's read by New Yorkers, that it is the closest thing we have, other than the Wall Street Journal, to a national newspaper. That is, people read it all over the United States. And you've all been to different parts of the country, and you know you can buy the New York Times there, often in fact have it delivered to your house. But it's also important because all the other people in the media begin their day as well with the New York Times. It's the politicians' daily Bible as well, even if they are a politician who, or at least the politician staff, who works in some other part of the United States. The New York Times, other than their local paper, is the kind of thing they turn to. So the New York Times is what so many people who make news turn to first, so that the way it covers things then filters down. Now, I made a big deal about the New York Times. We have other important newspapers. I mentioned the Wall Street Journal. That used to be the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, and various other Washington Post remains a very important newspaper. So it isn't just that the New York Times is captain of the whole thing. It's just that there is a hierarchy, and the work of those people counts for more than the work that goes on at, say, the Des Moines Register, with all due respect to those of you who are from Des Moines, and I assume it's a large number of you in this room who are from Des Moines. So it's an easy city for me. Anybody from Des Moines? Okay, then Des Moines will become our example of a place we can insult, and assault. I was once in the airport in Des Moines, and for a period of time I belonged to the Red Carpet Club, which is the United Airlines prestige, whatever, because I was traveling so much on United. And I said, "Do you have a Red Carpet Club?" And he said, "We're too small to have anything." So that was the self-consciousness of the at the United ticket counter in Des Moines. So we'll pick on Des Moines. Okay, so so our story is that the news media do count, the print media count, more than they're sometimes thought to count in this day and age of websites and blogs and all the rest of it. That might, of course, change. And the newspapers are, in crisis. They're losing circulation, and they're firing reporters. And we don't know where this is all going to end up. But at least for a while, it's the big deal. So what I was talking about then is that since these news media matter a lot, it matters a lot what they do, and then this is, I think, the non-obvious thing. What they report, and hence what is in your brain, results in significant degree, in part, by how they are organized. And that invites our friend Max Weber into our thinking and his writing on organizations, plus all the other people who I talked about and the other ways of thinking about organizations. Organization has consequence on destiny through minds. That's the idea, and that you have to, just like you have to, in order to have this class and all the other classes at NYU, the university has to be a complex organization that figures out things by having specific offices like the registrar versus the dean of this and the dean of that, the dean of the medical school and all their departments of ophthalmology and proctology and cardiology and all those other things. It's the only way they can get it all done. And so it is that the media, the news media, have to also bureaucratize in order for it to be done. And in this confusion of all the gazillion things that are going on in the world and in New York in particular as well, you have to carve it up. And that carving it up in the traditional media is called the beat structure. And that beat structure then has individuals assigned to it, just in the way that Weber says that each office has a person assigned to it who then cover that. And that allows the work to be done. And I also indicated, however, that that then leads to, one of the reasons that occurs that way is that they carve it up into things that are reliable. That is, that will give them stuff at the end of every day that they can then print in the paper. There are public relations offices, public information offices, and trails of and details of things that can create easy news. And the news media need easy news because of the vast volume of things that they have to write up and put on the air, in the case of television, every day. So they need the easy news. And things vary in how easy or hard they are, and in how easy or hard it is to get them done in an efficient way. And I pointed to crime as a wonderful kind of easy news. And it's wonderful because the police, the courts are all organized to provide a trail of what's going on. They shape what they do, in fact, that's the other way of looking at it, to a significant degree. They shape what they do and how they do it because of the fact that the trail will be visible and the reporters will be coming. And so internally in the organization, you have some changes that are occurring. But then along comes the reporter who picks up on that trail. And the crime is great stuff. It's easy, it's defensible because it comes from this high authority, this legitimate authority. And so you go with it. It's too good not to be important. Let's go back to all the news that's fit to print. It's just too cool not to be right for school. And so you get it in the paper because of that. If it bleeds, it leads is one of the slogans. Now, the New York Times is the most restrained by far of all our leading papers. in terms of how they cover things like crime and violence. They're restrained. But for the media as a whole, it's good stuff. It's very good stuff. So now we can take a particular study, like Mark Fishman's study of crime waves against the elderly. And what Fishman finds is that it's a bad record of what went on in the world, because he actually checks what really went on in the world, i.e. what at least another indicator of what really goes on in the world is that Fishman went to the police, which was in a way cooperating with this idea that there was a crime wave against the elderly. And Fishman learns that actually by police statistics themselves, there is no crime wave against the elderly. So how come there is a crime wave against the elderly? Well, there is a crime wave against the elderly because it fits all these criteria that I've talked about. It's great stuff. It is not only easy, but it also has a wonderful narrative, because what could be more wonderful than an old defenseless person, especially in those days, a victim of the Nazi concentration camps, of which there were still some around, a man with the number still on his wrist, and he gets mugged by a young hoodlum. I mean, who's not going to tune in on that? That is just very, very cool. So what happens is that you have this report of crime wave against the elderly. Grandma gets it, or the best yet, the concentration camp guy gets it. Old man, he gets it. And then the reporter may say to the politician, there's all this crime against old people going on, Mayor Bloomberg. What are you going to do about it? And Bloomberg says, there's going to be no more of this crime against the elderly. I've appointed a commission. I've had the city council take this up. We're going to have hearings. There's going to be grants to the nonprofit organizations, the women's organizations, the children's organizations, and the old people's organizations. And we're going to nip this thing in its bud. And then the politician at the state level sees, my God, they're on my trail because I did that business with the woman who was having an affair with my aide, and I did what I could to stop the harassment charge against him, and I got to get that out of the news. And so we got this crime wave against the elderly. This state of New York now must do something about crime waves against the elderly. And so we get more reports, because this opens up new points, new offices in the bureaucracy that get attended to. Because the reporters are not just going around the police department to pick up the droppings of the day. They go to the press conference in Albany of the governor. That's another person's beat. And they go to the state legislature. That's still another person's beat. And they may go to the organizations for old people here in Manhattan. That's another person's beat. And so you get then this reinforcement, a bandwagon, and applause, because these people may now create the united front for battling crimes against the elderly, which then gets its coverage. And so we have a whole crescendo of these people having a rousing time with each other, fighting the crime waves against the elderly, which Fishman says, based on your own organizational data, that is from the police, doesn't exist. It never happened. It isn't going on. So there's a decoupling between one set of portrayals of reality, in this case the media in New York, and on the other hand, the portrayals of reality from within the police department themselves. So this is not to say in really fact, like the wall, there are no crimes against the elderly, or there's no crime wave against the elderly. Who knows? The police don't know. They don't really record that. We don't know. But whatever that is. I mean, what does it take for someone to be elderly? What does it take for it to be a wave? How much above the norm does it need to be? What is a crime in the first place? Does not giving up your seat on the subway when an old person wants it? It says on the subway, it's not just a courtesy, it's the law. Well, if people are not doing that, is that a crime wave against the elderly? There's a lot of softness in all this. Even if, for those of us who believe in a reality and believe in walls, it's not so easy to say that there is or isn't a crime wave against the elderly. So Fisherman is saying, look, I'm not saying what's really wall-wall crime wave against the elderly. I'm saying that, look, from within the materials that you could work with, there is good evidence from the official data that you otherwise take so seriously. There is no evidence of a crime wave against the elderly. So the crime wave is coming from something else. And it's coming from the way in which the social organization works, the way in which the media themselves are organized, and the way in which the media intersects with these other organizational forms, like the police, the legislature, the governor's office, and all the rest of it. And out of all of that sort of ensemble comes, or doesn't come, the phenomenon of crime waves against the elderly. And we can speak of it as being socially constructed, this crime waves against the elderly, in which the media play an important role. And indeed, that is what we see most obviously as the kind of iceberg, the top of the iceberg of this much larger social operation. The larger point that I was trying to make last time is that what is in our minds is organized. It's not just organized by us, as we have a calendar or a daily planner. It is organized by the rest of the world and the media in particular. The media are a vehicle for organization to get into our brain. And that's what Fisherman is trying to show, that and in the narrow sense of organization of the media, as well as the large sense of what organization might be. Well, one of the places where reality is portrayed, this alleged reality, is in images and photographs, which are displayed, and they are supposed to be objective. A picture is worth 1,000 words. The camera never lies. These are all expressions that you may have heard. Nowadays, with Photoshop, we know that anything can be Photoshopped, and I think we have an awareness that that is a hard pill to swallow. But that's only quite recent. And over history, photographs have been taken as hard evidence, almost wallness of reality as something which happened and didn't happen. And so when we put together the media with, and its importance with photographs which are used in media, including in news media, we get a kind of strong case of reality production, or alleged reality production. And we can see in these photographs, and now comes my part, as opposed to the stereotypes that are otherwise around, we can see in these photographs the social organization of society, the way things are put together such that we get one impression in our minds as opposed to another one. Now, I believe, of course, it's human beings who are doing this. Human beings, like many people in this room, some of you will make your lives probably in journalism in one form or another, and you will take your orientations to the world, yourselves, as they've ended up being constructed at that moment in time, and you will be interpreting the world for others as you work for National Public Radio or Universal Studios or wherever you go do your work. Now, I'm going to show you some images from over time. And I spent the morning creating a PowerPoint for you. which, however, is not what I put on my data stick. Instead, what I have are the images I used to make the PowerPoint. And when you were coming in, you were seeing me frantically trying to organize them into some semblance of order. So you're going to have to, as you've been so many times, patient with me as we just go through them, and I hit the wrong buttons and make havoc here. So let's see if we can do this. So here we have, I want you to see, well, it's the Los Angeles Times, and it is at the moment when the United States is starting to prevail in the Pacific in World War II. And what we get is this photograph, which is one of the most famous news photographs of all times. There are a number of things that you can see about the Los Angeles Times, and this is significant of, I mean, this is what would be true of any American newspaper at that moment in history. This is not really objective news. 1,600 Navy planes attacked Tokyo, all Manila Japs killed. Well, you could say it has a celebratory tone to it. And killing people maybe is not what everyone would do at the moment of mass death. Whoops, has this thing got a mind of its own? Yeah, okay, great. And someone had to go to the bathroom really badly just now. But I am going to pitch to you that no one has to go to the bathroom anymore for the rest of the semester. That everyone just finds another way. A coloscopy, what do they call it? Coloscopy? Colostomy bag? Colostomy? Yeah, so you can go to the bookstore and get one with the NYU logo on it. And that will take care of any urgent needs. So anyway, what we have here is, let's talk about if you're in Japan. What would the Japanese newspaper have looked like that day in Tokyo? It would have probably not looked like this at all. I think that's very, very safe to say. So what I'm pitching to you right now is that nationalism is the ideology of media. And it's usually not so brazen as this, but it is just presumed. If a paper is supposed to be objective, give both sides, all sides, when it comes to their own nation state, that is not what they do. And that's part of the massive underpinning of how it is that people interact with one another. So we have all Manila Japs killed. And what this front page helps us do so nicely is that you can see the way this thing is constructed, not necessarily consciously, but almost as, you know, whether you see it as a duck or you see it as a bunny, there's a kind of, I don't use like the word gut capacity, but it's something like a gut capacity to see that raising the flag and all the Japs killed works together as a kind of ensemble of a story that is being told, of the U.S. being triumphant, and those critters over there who aren't really worth even dealing with except to kill them. I may be overstating it, but I think it's something like that. You can see the side story. Japs admit, what does it say? Air Armada rakes city. Well, we're talking about Tokyo vows death for Admiral Turner. So the Japanese side is covered by the fact that they want to kill that nice man there. That's Admiral Turner. And that's what you get when you deal with Japanese. And that's why you really kill them all is not a bad way to go. Because after all, look what they would want to do. Anyway, and of course we've got the Germans on the other side. Yanks drive across plain for Cologne. And we haven't said all Germans killed, but something like that kinda is on its way. I'm going to give you these in no order because I just didn't manage to do it. These are the kinds of things that are not in the media. This is Nixon and Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, and they're having drinks, and later you're going to see them spilling their drinks. You don't see things like this. This is President Nixon at a rally, and he's looking at his watch while he's shaking somebody's hand. And the media, I don't know if you could call it nationalism or what you could call it, but they tend not to expose our leaders who do all the things that we do. I mean, last time I quoted Nixon from the Nixon tapes, what the blank do I care about the lira? Time's moving on. And some presidents, I think, leave it to their handlers to move them from place to place. But if they should look at their watch while they are talking to somebody, then that's something to be not paid attention to. If you're doing a social movement and you're trying to confront the city council, which is something like what's going on here, I don't remember the details and I can't read this very, very well, what you do is you trot out your victims. And if you've got a concentration camp victim and you want to get the police to do X, Y, Z, then you'll bring that concentration camp victim to the hearing. And here is a woman whose welfare is at stake. And it's something about cutting off her help to people in this category. And I do see that she's 94 years old and she's ready for deployment. I'm not going to go into that. Oh, you probably don't remember Patty Hearst. Patricia Hearst, alias Tanya. So Patricia Hearst is the heiress to the great Hearst fortune in California. I mean, the Hearst family is, you all know about Hearst Castle and the Hearst building and the Hearst newspapers and Hearst mining you probably know less about. Anyway, and this was the cover of Time magazine because Patty Hearst was a Berkeley undergraduate and she was kidnapped by the radicals and the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA as they were called, and indeed very radical organization. But while she was in their custody as a kidnappee, she fell in love with them and joined up and became involved in a bank robbery, which she was then arrested for. She also had a love affair with the leader. And she changed her name to Tanya while she's underground and issued tapes that denounced her family as capitalist pigs. Now this was quite a story, as you might imagine. And the police did catch her, along with the other people. There was a shootout, and at least one was killed. I don't remember the details of it. Well, when she's in prison, though, she has a change of heart again, and she decides she loves her family. They're not capitalist pigs, and it was all just a big misunderstanding. And she appears in court and makes it to the cover of Time magazine again. But look what they've done with the image. You see the full front criminal image, the jail typeface apprehended, Patricia Hearst, alias Tanya. And now she's Patty. She's gone all soft, and she's, she could well be in this room, one of the lovely young women taking Sociology 1 at Berkeley. As opposed to, this is Speaker Willie Brown. He also became the mayor of San Francisco. And what I want to show you is Gang of Five. It doesn't matter who they were. It's politicians. It's no real gang. Seen as ungrateful lover. They cast it in sexual terms by hurt Speaker Brown. And there he is, all hurt. Now, one of the things about human faces is that in any given setting, they go through a panoply of expressions. And I know you've all had that experience. Somebody brings you the pictures from the party, and you go, oh, I hate that one, I hate that one, I hate that one, I hate that one. Look how stupid I look, my mouth is open, my this is that, my that. So if you just shoot a series of pictures of somebody at something, there's going to be all kinds of variations. And so choosing which one you will run in the newspaper represents a choice. And again, they're running this narrative. They didn't say to him, Speaker Brown, would you give us a hurt expression? They didn't do that. They had various snaps of him, and they chose to run that one. Now that's part of a larger story, by the way, of black men and how they're portrayed in the media, and what that looks like. And I'm going to got more for you along those ways. Here's President Bush at toward the end of his term, and his popularity is weak. This is not the kind of photo you want. So it shows him in the foreground with emptiness behind him. Usually there's a circle of supporters, or maybe the flags, or maybe some guns, but there wouldn't be just nothing. And this choice is the narrative of President Bush being at the end of his presidency and at a low point in public opinion, which of course helped Barack Obama to win the presidency. Now, I know a lot of you like to put your heads down and cast to the side. This is one of the pictures at Iwo Jima. And it was on the same roll of film as the one that that ran on the front cover of the LA Times and that became the basis for the statue at Arlington National Cemetery and the symbol virtually of the U.S. Marines. So this also could have run because it's right there that this happened as they were trying to get the flag stuck in the ground. It's not something that you just do gorgeously like that statue. You try this way, you try that way. And there's much discussion about the fact that some people say that that flag image that is the most familiar one was fully staged and composed. But whether it was or it wasn't, it was one of a series that could have been used. We're going to come back to that one. That one's very cool, but this is President Reagan at a low moment in his career as President of the United States. He acted correctly on Iran. He says he actually did something that was really very scummy. And he denies it, of course, and the pressure is on him. And so look at the expression on his face. He's not looking very triumphant. He's all in trouble. And that will indicate that. Here he is saying that the deal was worth the risks. He's under pressure. And here he is on the cover of a Middle Eastern magazine. They tended to treat him consistently this way rather than the pictures of a president that we are used to. And when I saw this image at first, I was just shocked because I'd never seen Reagan portrayed like that before. Here is President Jimmy Carter. And President Carter lost a lot of points because he was thought to be weak and not a real man at all. Reagan came in and really exploited that. And Bush really is working off that heritage that we have of this weak president. This photo ran of him. And you can see what you do. If you overlight a face, you will get this weakness, a kind of, oops, what, my God, whoa, Statue of Liberty, we'll come back to all these things. I'm going to show you later another picture of President Carter where he doesn't look weak because he's properly lit. This is a major, major picture that had a little bit of an effect on history just on its own. You've got Republican John Warner, who's a U.S. Senator, and San Nunn. Warner is the one in the foreground, the first one you see. I can tell you about him. Does anybody know who he was married to? Come on, People magazine. Who was he married to? No one knows. Elizabeth Taylor. Whoa. I mean, only briefly, which is the only way you could be married to Elizabeth Taylor, who I'm fond of, much more than I am of John Warner. Anyway, John Warner and his colleague there, Sam Nunn, were very concerned about gays in the military, G-A-Y-S. And so what they did was visited a submarine, which is something that I do on Tuesdays and Thursdays right after class, typically, and brings the reporters with them so that at the end get the guys to go on the bunk, fully dressed, because of course that's the only way it's going to run. But you can see what would it be like to have a homosexual next to you like that. I think that many of you would probably vote Republican in order to stop it. And so don't ask, don't tell is the compromise that emerged from this kind of coverage of what it would be like if we put gays in the military. And the point, of course, I want to run is that, is that they ran it. See, that's a very big thing, that the organization of the media is such that when important U.S. senators say, come on, we're going to a submarine, they say, okay, I'm coming. If I went out into the street today or called the New York Times or the Post and said, we're going to a submarine today, they say, oh, we're not, what, I'm not going to no submarine today. So it's a choice that's made. And in part, it's this organizational structure of the media that is part of their routine to follow senators around and pick up I use the word, the droppings of their activities. I'm going to skip that one. This I got from somebody else. By the way, what you're seeing is a sort of long run of my experiences, clipping things out of newspapers and putting them together for purposes like this. Here we have, at the United Nations, it looks like the representative of the Soviet Union is yelling at the United States. And pardon my text for being backwards there. It's a little bit of a homemade touch, isn't it? And that is what is going on. But in fact, the way it was run, it looks like the Soviet Union guy is yelling at the United Kingdom guy. And that's the way it ran in Britain, as opposed to that he's actually pissed off at the United States, and Britain is sort of trying to stay out of it. But by cropping it, by cropping the photo, then that's the result that you get. I'm going to skip that one for now, at least. This has stopped work. I'm going to stop that one. Oh, this is a kind of cool one. The Palestinians don't get very good coverage in the United States, and this is an exception to that. A voice for Palestine. So voice is a really nice word. We have a woman with a gentle expression on her face, and she is allowed to have her hand on her chin, which is the way photography studios organize a photograph of an important person. Much more than human beings. Like right now, I see, there's a fellow who has his hand in that mode. But in my quick look, I didn't see a single other person like that. But this is a very frequent pose of thoughtful, gentle, thinking leaders of our world. And I'm going to show you an alternative in just a moment. Here is the White House in disarray over Iran. And someone is coming to the podium and someone is leaving the podium. This is a very common experience, that someone is coming and someone is going from the podium. If you want to portray disarray, all you have to do is get them at that moment of someone coming and someone going. And so it works with the story. I'm not going to push a button, but it's just got a little mind of its own, that's all. And I'm going to go to this so I can pick out some really, some just really great ones for you. So the issue of African American men and how they are portrayed this is not that, but well worth looking at. This is President Clinton taking a football in the face. And although many people would say the media were unfair to President Clinton in various ways, they tend not to run photographs like this, even though it says Associated Press, which means that it was made available to virtually every newspaper in the country, and a whole lot in the world, but very few of them ran that. This is the one I wanted to show you. So this is an African American man. I think this is in Newsweek magazine. Mistaken identity, and this is a man who got in trouble with the police, something that will be coming up later in our term a whole lot, that this does happen. And we have a striking picture because we see a young African American man with a baby, with a small child. It is indeed his own son. But the rareness of that kind of photo, you see, I think derives from the fact that African American men are not seen that way by the people who do the media. And it's just not something that is going to work with the narrative that is out there and that the media are always feeding. And I say that not pejoratively. I know it sounds like I'm criticizing the media. This is the kind of photograph that presidents and politicians just love. Baby kissing and enjoying small children. And here's President Bush, the first President Bush, and he is working with a small child. And President Bush may have loved small children. I don't know. But this is what you want to have happen. Can you remember back to the washed out Jimmy Carter? This is what Jimmy Carter's office, Public Information Office, the White House, this is the picture they want used. And every time something different is used, especially something like that washed out, overlit picture, that's a defeat for President Carter. Did I show you this one yet? This is Vice President Dan Quayle, and this actually ran in the New York Times, but only in the first edition. And then they took it out, and they put in a picture, I flashed it on a minute ago, of him commemorating a statue in the West, completely unrelated, but we don't do that. This is, sometimes pictures change history in other ways. This was the report of Kent State University. This happened to run in Britain, but it ran all over the world. And this is a quote from President Nixon because he called the demonstrators on campuses across the country, not necessarily at Kent State, which is where this photo was taken. He called them campus bums. And what happened was the National Guard fired on a group of students at Kent State and killed 3 of them. And here we have a woman in horror bent over the body. Now, I hope it comes up in a minute, but before the next one does, in case it doesn't, I have the picture that this was cropped from. So once again, there was a choice of whether to run this picture. There was a choice of exactly how to run it. And they chose to run it in a way that ups the narrative saga and makes it more clear. Sorry to be hopping around like this, but here's the angry black man who is once again in the media. This is from the Los Angeles Times. I'm going to skip that one. This one I got to tell you about. So this is, who knows who this is? Oh, it says it. No, it doesn't. He ran for president of the United States. Dukakis. And this photograph really helped do him in. He wanted to be military. The Democrats always have a problem, that they're not tough enough. And so he got into a tank. And I think most people thought he looked like a mouse. And it was much ridiculed as a stunt. So See, what's really interesting is that all these things are stunts. I mean, get back to Irving Goffman. It's all theater. We're all stunting for each other all the time. What you don't want is for someone to say, you're just doing a stunt. You're only saying that because you want me to invite you to meet my father who owns the company. It's just a stunt. And so all those things I'm showing you are stunts, kissing babies and all the rest of it. But if someone sees that you've done a stunt and calls it as a stunt, which is always the potential, so the fact that it happens then undermines it completely. So you've got to constantly be doing stunts, and you've got to constantly be doing that you're not doing a stunt. And again, we're all doing that all the time. That's what makes life just a real pain in the ass. And he lost out. And indeed, he lost the presidency. These are two pictures of eggs. I actually have a whole egg story, but I'm not going to give it to you right now. Who is this? Does anybody recognize this person? One student should. Yes. Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister of India at one point and was assassinated eventually. And she had a mixed reputation in India, for sure, and also in the United States to a lesser degree. The word Gandhi is magical, of course, in this country, and so is, we think all these traits are inherited, and so therefore so is the daughter of Gandhi, who Indira Gandhi was. Wasn't she? She was not. Well, then that's not true what I just said, that wisecrack. We're going to get to her again in a minute. Oh, I wanted to show you this. This is another picture from that same roll of film of putting up the flag at Iwo Jima. And you see that it's the way you would put up a flag in your backyard, but it doesn't make for a very dramatic narrative. Some photographs have had important historical consequence. The invention of photography, you know, it's a 20th century, late 19th century invention. This photograph was reprinted vastly across the United States as a case against child labor. And the child labor laws were changed. This is a New England textile mill as a result of that. We're going to skip that guy. We're going to skip him again, him again, him again. Boring man, who cares? Do you remember the other picture of Indira Gandhi? Do you recall it? Yeah, you can do that, right? You're that young and smart. So here she is, completely differently depicted. And these different depictions have important significance. There's Ronald Reagan looking like Howdy Doody. Do you know who Howdy Doody was? Yeah, I think he very much looks like Howdy Doody. This is the picture at Kent State as it actually was developed. And you can see that it doesn't work as horror because they're just students who are hanging around. Now, what this does mean is that these students were killed not in the context of a violent demonstration, which is one of the things the conservative media were depicting, is that these people were disruptive. So in a way, it served the anti-war movement by exaggerating the horror of it, by making it more, in a way, artistically successful by the cropping. But on the other hand, it removes information. And that information is that it's extremely unlikely that this student is part of some kind of demonstration. And she has just now come across his body. And I mean, she hasn't just come across it. I mean, there's National Guard on the campus. They are lined up, they shoot, and that's what happens. Remember the picture of the young black man with the child. Here is another picture of young black men. And the headline is, "Gangs Put LA on Edge. Neighborhood Feels More Hope Than Hatred," page 2A. In fact, what these guys are doing is they're leading the campaign to remove guns from the streets of LA. And what they have done is gathered these weapons together, which they now have, which they're turning into the police. and they have a much larger cache that they have organized. But the headline is "Gangs Put LA on Edge." And so, again, this narrative is working together, despite the fact that I'll just bet you that anyone involved in this, if you called them racist, they would say that is wrong and ridiculous, and probably they are not. It's just that if you're used to seeing ducks, it's hard to see a bunny now and then, even when it's bunny before you. And so that's what they are unable to do, is make that switch. This is Dole, Libby Dole, who was in the cabinet, the wife of the Dole who ran for president of the United States. And as she's campaigning, she also looks at her watch. And I'll just give you a few more because I find these very interesting. This is a professor at Northwestern University who received a racist comment from, I forgot the guy's name, Paul Lynde, who was on Hollywood Squares. He is a comic in the United States. Some of you may know of him or not know of him. He was famous in his moment, and he came back to Northwestern University, which he was a graduate of, to lead the annual Baba Bum Parade, whatever it was. And, and while he was there, it's funny to think about it this way. He went to Burger King and was standing in line making racial slurs about this guy who was a professor of sociology, who was ahead of him in line. And Paul Lynde is making racial slurs that they got in the wrong line, that this guy will be too dumb to be able to order. Something like that. And then the professor makes a big deal out of it and complains that his university is bringing a racist to the campus and glorifying him by making him the head of the parade or head of the event or whatever it was. My point is that look the way they shot him. He is extremely tall. He's 6'7". I can't remember. I think he's 6'7". He is very tall. And I was teaching at Northwestern at this time, and he told me all about it. And the photographer kept saying for him to stand up for the picture next to his wife, who is actually particularly short. And so he would look like just a giant. And he refused. So they shot him sitting down, but shot him from the bottom, so you could see how large his legs are, how long his legs are. And this was important because in the story, it talks about the giant that Lynde insulted, and in a way that kind of takes away from what Lynde is trying to say, is that the story is about a racist being honored by Northwestern University. This is about spraying from the air, the LA Times. This was very controversial because you're spraying an insecticide, and this is considered environmentally dangerous by some, especially in San Francisco, where the helicopter medfly area gets bigger, and the helicopter is such a menace, it's actually coming off out of its photograph and flying right into the masthead of the newspaper. This is a great one. This is Attorney General Mitchell, who was the United States Attorney General under Richard Nixon, and he was accused of various crimes. He's acquitted, and here he is with his lawyers and henchmen celebrating at that moment. Again, this is not something you would ordinarily run. This is, does anybody know who this is? It's a well-known name in New York State. Well, he's as rich as Rockefeller, let me tell you that. This is Nelson Rockefeller. He brought us so many things, including the World Trade Center. He ran for president several times of the United States. If he didn't get the Republican nomination, he ran for vice president of the United States. He did get the nomination. And here he is giving somebody the finger. And this was not run. It was, okay, I mentioned before that photographs change history. This is in Vietnam. And this is at the time when public opinion in the United States starts changing toward the war. The media are starting to change their coverage as well as their editorial positions. This is a photograph of a Vietnamese general shooting dead in the street. You can see they're right in the street, someone he suspects of being a Viet Cong. that is part of the communist movement. There is also a video of this. I don't know if it's on YouTube, but it is one of the most extraordinary things to see. And this then becomes another aspect of the movement against the war. These photographs also run in the newspapers dramatically, and here it is that children are running away from the bombing of their village. Now, there is more controversy about this as well as to actually what's going on and whether U.S. troops are protecting them or not. The issue here isn't what's really going on. The issue is that they chose to run it and to portray it as part of the horror of the war. This one is less horrible. Again, it's from the same roll of film as the one you just saw. But that you run this one and not that one, obviously it's going to have differential consequences. And we're back to Patty Hearst again, and maybe I'll go shopping for ones that I may have left out. I want to get back to the wall and the issue of what's real and what's not real. Now, there's a very big issue there to try to think about. Our mission in the course is going to try to reconcile those things, is to try to show you that, yes, the media, there are many different things that they can portray with many different consequences. But I've tried to lay the basis, at least, for your understanding or realizing or come to the conclusion that although they could do anything, they don't just do anything. That they are, in effect, pulling from the sort of reservoir of images, thoughts that are already at large in the culture, of which racism is one, for example, of which American patriotism and jingoism is one, for example. Sympathy for those who are being injured, that's another one, for example. And that all of those are potentials, and they're being made possible by the nature of American society and at that particular moment, as the media themselves are organized and play their own role to make it turn out one way or another. And that there are, in other words, there are sort of heritages, pre-existing conditions that give rise to this coverage, but that the coverage, as it responds to those pre-existing circumstances, has then consequence on the next set of circumstances. It's a kind of interactional operation, but at the high level, at the macro level, in a way, though, kind of analogous to the way George Herbert Mead talks about it at the individual level. So that's what we're going to try to constantly keep our eye on, is the way in which we are made by our environment, by our context, and by our history, as we indeed participate in the making of that context and history. So that's our mission, that's our goal.